trillion pales in the face of the 7 trillion that is spent annually on fossil fuel subsidies. The money is there. It is just in exactly the wrong place. I hope leaders have the ability to spot a bargain, to understand a win-win when presented with it, and to recognize the social and economic, environmental and political costs of perpetuating fossil fuels far exceed the benefit. Excellencies, as a Minister of Finance myself, I have no appetite for bad maths, no intent.
诸位阁下，我们必须要确保提供稳定，而且马上就要做到。现在的碳的成本呢，也需要我们在经济方面进行可行的措施。
Vote forward by future generations whose reality you are determining and shaping today. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Sophie Hermans, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Climate Policy and Green Growth of the Kingdom of Netherlands. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we are gathering amidst an increasingly alarming climate reality. It's too wet, too dry, and too polluted. The struggle against water, which has defined the history of the Netherlands, is taking on new forms in both the European and the Caribbean parts of our kingdom. In the Netherlands, we overcame our struggle against water by working together, shoulder to shoulder. Across the world, we can do the same. If we want to turn the tide on climate change, we have to stand together. And we can, if everybody does what is needed and what has been agreed. And I want to assure you, the Netherlands stands ready to help, to deliver what has been agreed, even if it's difficult. And to discuss this with each other in all transparency. Ladies and gentlemen, our history with water gives me hope when I look to the future. And yes, we will have to prepare, adapt. But climate adaptation is nothing new to us. And the knowledge and expertise that we have, we share. We share it when it comes to water management and drinking water, to offshore wind and green hydrogen. And we share our financial innovations too. Dutch pension funds now invest in climate action beyond our borders. Amsterdam-based asset manager ILX grows climate investments funds by matching public and private funding. Last week, here at COP, they announced an increase of their total fund to $1.7 billion. It's precisely these kinds of examples that give me hope. The EU has been a steadfast donor, and so are we. The Netherlands currently delivers 1.8 billion euros of climate finance per year, public and private. Of our public climate finance, 60% goes to adaptation, grant-based and geared towards the most vulnerable. Finally, we are spearheading an international coalition to deliver on the promise made since Cop26, to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. I encourage you all to join us and take the next step in increasing transparency, identifying barriers and take national action. Ladies and gentlemen, to scale up our collective efforts, we need everyone, including the market, especially the market, considering the scale of the challenge. We know that every challenge presents an opportunity. Opportunities for today, but especially for generations of the future. We are at a turning point, the point where we must seize the opportunity to turn the tides. And if there's one constant in history, it's that humanity always finds a way out when we face major challenges. Always. And I'm convinced we can do it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Abdoulaye Maiga, Minister of State and Government spokesperson of Mali. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Secrétaire général de l'Organisation des Nations Unies,
Secretary General of the United Nations, President of the Conference of Parties, Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, at the start of my statement, may I warmly congratulate the Presidency of Cop29 as well as the people and government of the Republic of Azerbaijan for the exemplary organization of this Conference of the Parties. I also wish to convey to you the heartfelt greetings of His Excellency General Assimi Goïta, President for the Transition and Head of State of the Mali Republic, and the Malian people and government, who are profoundly committed to combating climate change. Mali, like so many other nations, is acutely facing the damaging effects of climate change, which jeopardize not only our environment but also our socio-economic stability. The disastrous impacts of recurring flooding, which we've experienced this year, have caused loss of human life, material damage, as well as the degradation of some basic infrastructure, prompting the government on the 23rd of August of this year to adopt a decree declaring a state of national disaster and urgent action to support the victims. Indeed, these environmental phenomena are constantly increasing the loss and damage our populations face, considerably reducing our ability to respond effectively to the climate emergency. It is in this context that COP29 is taking place at a critical time in the world's at a crossroads. More than ever, it's essential to translate the many promises of global summits into concrete beneficial actions to support populations. Mali, a state spanning 1,241,238 square kilometers, with two-thirds of its territory being desert, seriously suffers from the effects of climate change, especially disruption of rainfall cycles and recurrent frequency of pockets of drought, reducing agricultural yields, which in turn exacerbates food insecurity. Indeed, my country is involved in a transition process whose rationale lies on the need to refound the state in order to respond in a lasting manner to the profound legitimate aspirations of our people, especially in restoring security, maintaining peace, national cohesion, sovereignty, unity, and the true independence of our state. Today, the nexus between climate change, peace, and security is widely recognized. The Bamako Declaration from the first regional forum on climate security in the Sahel, which took place in November last year, fully reflects our commitment to integrate these challenges into our security and development policies. Ladies and gentlemen, in any event, although we're a low greenhouse gas emitting country in global terms, Mali is resolved to play its role to the full in combating climate change, especially through implementing its nationally determined contribution. Thus, in the action plan of our government, we plan massive reforestation over a territory of 100,000 hectares a year, restoration of degraded land, establishment of 150,000 hectares of forests and 100,000 hectares of sustainable management practices, the rehabilitation of the Niger and Senegal rivers, as well as the development of 4 photovoltaic power plants for 400 megawatts in 2024. These investments will allow us to increase by 10% the share of renewable energy in our energy mix by 2030. Furthermore, in pursuing the social work embarked upon by His Excellency General Assima Goïta, the head of state, 402 boreholes have been effected to benefit vulnerable populations. This is also the time to recall that ever since the summit of the Alliance of Sahel States, held in Niamey on the 6th of July of this year, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger decided sovereignly to transform the ASS, the Alliance of Sahel States, into a confederation to be presided over this year by Mali, with the respective heads of state of the three countries concerned. Those three presidents being the founding fathers of this confederation, which is supposed to become a federation over time, focusing their efforts on three tracks: diplomacy, defense and development, integrating climate and environmental issues. In this context, in the framework of the Malian presidency of the ASS Confederation, the roadmap for the first year provides in particular for facilitating access to water for the populations of our confederal territory, thanks to launching an operation entitled 1,000 boreholes in the ASS space. We cannot overlook the historical responsibility of the major polluters in this crisis. The African continent, which only produces 4% of global emissions, is disproportionately affected by the disastrous effects of heat warming. It is therefore essential for countries to honour their commitments for climate finance, while ensuring that the promises made at previous COPs are kept. The climate emergency means we have to step up our efforts globally. Therefore, Mali is calling for an in-depth reform of the financial architecture of the multilateral development banks and the international financial system, so that they may better respond to the needs of the developing countries, especially in the area of adaptation and mitigation regarding climate change effects. Ladies and gentlemen, Mali expresses a wish that this Cop29 will not just be a routine diplomatic exercise, but a decisive turning point in our collective battle for the survival of our planet and the well-being of future generations. Before concluding, may I pay powerful tribute to President Ilham Aliyev, as well as the people and government of Azerbaijan, for their leadership and commitment in preparing this 29th COP. Our thanks also go to the African Negotiators Group for their determination to champion the positions of the developing countries, especially those of the African countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Toe Ole Sulu Kedrick Schuster, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Samoa, speaking on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Cop29 President, Your Excellency Mutta Babayev, my fellow dear ministers, at the outset, let me thank the government of Azerbaijan for the warm hospitality and wonderful arrangements. As the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, Samoa speaks on behalf of 39 small islands and low-lying coastal nations, which represent many unheard voices beyond this room, who require climate justice and who need this process to move forward with action rather than talk. Climate change is a phenomenon that we are all feeling today with hotter summers and colder winters. We are now facing the possibility of losing the most vulnerable countries with the least capacity to address these climate events. Climate impacts must be addressed immediately and with a keen sense of urgency. IPCC scientists are calling for immediate reductions in greenhouse emissions to make the world safe. While we spend trillions globally on fossil fuel, infrastructure and security, we are doing nothing to save humanity from the clutches of climate change. The preparation and implementation of the most ambitious NDCs is a critical part to the solutions under the Paris Agreement, and countries are at different stages. We must move forward from a business-as-usual scenario to scenarios that make our planet resilient. Deep emission cuts should be our key priority in developing our NDCs. The special needs and circumstances of SIDS were recognized in Rio in 1992 and reaffirmed at the last SIDS conference in Antigua and Barbuda in June this year. Our fragile economies, limited resources, and the remoteness of our islands, nations, must be fully addressed within the new goal. Agreement to a goal that fails to recognize the special case of small island states would ensure that the Paris Agreement will fail to meet its goals. Mr. President, this long-awaited climate finance COP must give us a beacon of hope in the coming decade. The goal must address the needs and priorities of each developing country. AOSIS's top priority for this COP is to see its key ask for the joint SIDS and LDC submission on respective minimum allocation floors of at least $39 billion per year for SIDS and $220 billion per year for LDCs, included in the final NCTG outcome. The goal should not focus entirely on mitigation and adaptation, but given the ever-increasing impacts on climate change, financing for loss and damage has to be included. The goal agreed in Baku must also provide a strong foundation on how we report back and monitor climate financing received. Transparency and accountability will allow us to reach the 1.5 degree goal in this critical decade. At COP26, we were promised a doubling of adaptation finance, and we were assured that our partners were working towards raising these funds. But over the last years, access to adaptation finance has been more than challenging for us. As countries with the least capacity to implement adaptation actions, we need grant-based financing to meet our adaptation needs. Mr. President, COP29 must deliver a substantive outcome on mitigation that allows us to progress the agreement we made last year as a part of the UAE consensus, which is critical for reaching the 1.5 degree goal and making our planet safe and prosperous. The newly established Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage that SIDS have long advocated for must come into play here. We must ensure the complementarity and coherence among all funding arrangements to address loss and damage as we strive to achieve the 1.5 goal within this crucial decade. Multilateralism is built on trust and cooperation between countries. Transparency in climate change reporting is a considerable game changer for maintaining this trust. Our commitments under Article 13 of the Paris Agreement provide the vehicle framework for this transparency, and we welcome the submission of parties' first biannual transparency report at the end of this year. Mr. President, the ocean climate nexus is clear. Healthy oceans are fundamental to achieving our 1.5 goal. Samoa therefore calls for recognition of the ocean climate nexus in climate action, acknowledging that our ocean health is intrinsically linked to global climate stability. Samoa stands in solidarity with Australia in its bid to host COP31, or the Pacific COP, recognizing that its platform as essential for advocating global awareness and actions on climate issues that disproportionately affect island communities. I implore you all to lend your support to our bid for COP31 to amplify the voices of those that are most affected by climate change, particularly small island states, where the impacts are felt acutely. Mr. President, before I conclude, allow me to refresh our memories on the historic GST outcome last year. It was a difficult agreement to reach, but despite our differences, we outlined bold actions which call on the international community to transition away from fossil fuels by significantly increasing the use of renewable energy and improving energy efficiency. We must find space for operationalizing this monumental language as we embark on the journey of solving the climate problem together and making the world a better place for us all to live in. Finally, Mr. President, rest assured, small islands will work hard to be part of a solution that is based on equity and justice. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Wopke Hoekstra, European Commissioner of the European Union, and Mr. Atlia Steiner, State Secretary for Energy, and Climate of the Minister of Energy of Hungary, speaking on behalf of the European Union Group. Your Excellencies, you have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, dear Excellencies, I'm delivering this speech jointly with my colleague, Commissioner Högstra, on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. We want to reiterate the European Union's and its member states' commitment to climate action, to achieving climate neutrality by 2050, and to demonstrating our leadership continuously and transparently in the coming years. As there is no time to waste, it's important that we all come together in Baku to achieve a balanced outcome. As Cop29 is said to be an implementation COP, we are concerned with the progress on mitigation. Therefore, it is a top priority for us to see advancement on mitigation in Baku and have an ambitious and robust outcome. Governments, the private sector and civil society around the world are aware that keeping the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal within reach, in line with the IPCC recommendations, is more than an environmental and scientific need. We already feel the consequences of inaction. Therefore, following the decision in Dubai, we must signal that we are all united in the fight against climate change by collectively responding towards the full implementation of the results of the global stocktake. It is our duty to ensure that the domestic and international implementation of the GST is ambitious, credible, and 1.5 aligned. To achieve an ambitious outcome on the NCQG by agreeing on an overall scale of the quantum, first we have to ensure that the group of contributors is broadened, including to those parties that are capable to do so. Let me also underline that there is a collective responsibility to contribute, reflecting global solidarity, making sure that the finance flows to those who are most vulnerable, while driving the mobilization of finance at scale towards the Paris Agreement objectives. While we attach great importance to the public core of the new goal, public resources alone will not suffice. And furthermore, the international carbon markets could also help the developing countries to have access to more climate finance and cost-effective solutions. These effectively contribute to decarbonization, therefore we are committed to reach an agreement here in Baku. Last but not least, we consider it important to reach the balance between climate adaptation and mitigation at the COP29, because we believe that adaptation and mitigation go hand in hand in order to keep ourselves as international community to the goals of the Paris Agreement. And now let me hand over to Commissioner Högstra. Thank you very much.
For that, thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying that the EU's green transition is well on the way. We have adopted the full European Green Deal legislation to achieve our 2030 target and also stay the course for 2050 climate neutrality. We're scaling up our investments in energy efficiency and clean energy, and of course that includes renewables, hydrogen and grids. And let me state once again that we as a global community cannot afford to backslide. We all must build on what we call the UAE consensus. There is simply no success without it. And that is the reason that the EU has spearheaded the COP28 Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge, and we're currently implementing it. On the eve of the G20 summit, European Commission President von der Leyen and South African President Ramaphosa launched the global campaign Scaling Up Renewables in Africa to mobilize renewables investment in Africa. And to make sure we maintain momentum more broadly, the EU will invite G20 leaders and others to join forces in a new global energy transition forum. It will bring together governments, international organizations and financial actors to double down on implementation. Ahead of COP30, we must all prepare new NDCs, and these must be economy-wide. They must cover all greenhouse gases, and they need to be aligned with our 1.5 temperature goal. And just to be clear, the bar needs to go up for all of us. Colleagues, we're here to deliver an ambitious new collective quantified goal on climate finance. A goal that contributes to making all financial flows consistent with the Paris Agreement goals. It should account for the evolving economic capacities of partners to provide and mobilize climate finance. And we're also making progress on the rules on carbon markets. It is essential that we all sign up to high integrity, to additionality, to durability and to accountability. President, ladies and gentlemen, let me close off by saying that the European Union remains deeply committed to climate action and that we will continue to demonstrate leadership in the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. David Forner Massoni, Secretary of State for Energy Transition, Transport and Mobility of Andorra. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished President, distinguished authorities, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to address you today in Cop29 on behalf of Andorra, a small country in size, but great in terms of its climate action. Since 2011, as part of the convention, Andorra has sought to lead by example, and it is with pride that we can say that Andorra has been the first country to present and complete its biennial transparency report as part of the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. This is a step that underscores not only our dedication but also our commitment to transparency and accountability in our climate actions. I wanted to avail myself of this platform to thank the Presidency and the diplomats of France who during COP29 for devising a new paradigm that we cannot let go to waste now. First, the BTR is not only a report on our climate action, but it is a declaration on transparency which all countries must abide by. We therefore wish to highlight our 3.0 NDC as required under the Paris Agreement. We will be increasing our ambition of our reduction of emissions by 2035 compared with 2005. This is in line with the goal of increasing, limiting increase to 1.5 compared with pre-industrial levels. Andorra is on track with the targets under the Paris Agreement, but also the commitments from the global stocktake in Dubai last year. We understand that achieving the global objectives of the 2030 agenda, that is to say the goals such as the SDGs, must come through multilateralism such as the one that is being afforded us here. All of this without overlooking the fact that adaptation continues to be a key priority, especially for our mountainous countries such as ours. Vulnerability of our mountainous terrain is widely recognized by the scientific community, which also recognizes the adaptation limits of mountainous zones, which is increasingly evident and pressing. As reported by the Climate Change Observatory for the Pyrenees, the increase is higher in this region than surrounding areas. That is to say, there is a 2-degree increase since 1959. Last winter in our country was the warmest on record for a country such as ours with snow-based tourism as one of its economic pillars. These are alarming data. For this reason, we are focusing our efforts on adapting the most exposed sectors to these conditions. Sectors such as tourism, agriculture, health, and energy require constant protection and adaptation to continue to prosper in these new climate conditions. Especially for those territories such as ours with minimal contribution to global emission levels, which are highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, I need not remind you, being transparent in our reports and fulfilling with the reporting obligations under the convention is essential for us to be demanding with other parties who have huge mitigation potential. Once we have transparent data and information in hand, we as mountain countries are better positioned to advocate for equitable support and resources. Only by being an example and transparent can we make demands, and this is what we're doing. We believe that each country, regardless of their global impact size or stature, have a crucial role to play in keeping 1.5 within reach. We must fight together for transparency. Thank you very much, President, Secretariat, and many thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Josephine Napon Cosmos Ngoya, Minister of Environment and Forestry of South Sudan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Of COP29, Excellencies, on outset, I would like to take this opportunity to convey to you the greetings and well wishes of His Excellency Salva Kiir Mayardit, President of the Republic of South Sudan, who is unable to attend this COP29 because of pressing issues back at home. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the people and the government of Azerbaijan for the excellent hospitality accorded to my delegation and for hosting this conference in the beautiful city of Baku. Mr. President, I would like to congratulate you on the election as COP29 President and wish you success in leading this COP to fruitful outcomes. Since 2019 to date, South Sudan is reeling from severe flooding that have impacted over 3 million people, resulting to internal displacement and loss of livelihoods. Droughts, excess heat waves, absurd rain patterns, all resulted in crop failure. Thus, over 60% of our population are now categorized as food insecure. As a country most affected by the impacts of climate change, building the resilience of people to adapt to the impacts of climate change is the priority of the people and the government of the Republic of South Sudan. However, this priority cannot be achieved without the provision of adequate climate finance. Therefore, the new collective quantified goal is to be agreed at COP29, and the new quantum is to be in trillions of dollars, and modalities for accessing the new funds are to be streamlined and simplified. On the loss and damage, the sustainable capitalization and operationalization of the fund is to be expedited, such that our affected populations can be compensated. On the emission gap, it is abundantly clear we have fallen behind on cutting GHG emissions, and the current path will lead us to a 3.5 degrees Celsius increase. Therefore, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we urge the developed countries and the big emitters to increase their ambitions and drastically cut their emissions such that the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal is kept alive. On Article 6, South Sudan is home to the largest wetland in Africa. The Sudan has over 30% of forest cover with enormous carbon sequestration capacity. Therefore, Article 6 negotiations that are dragged on are to be concluded amicably at this COP. This will enable us to trade in carbon and invest the proceeds in our climate mitigation and adaptation projects. Mr. President, many vulnerable people are eagerly watching and expecting COP29 to deliver outcomes that will improve their lives and livelihoods. Therefore, South Sudan will be negotiating in a good faith and will be ready to reach common ground and consensus on difficult issues such that together we can turn the tide to deadly impacts of climate change. Lastly, our environment requires us to change our attitudes and embark on ambitious nature-based solutions by actively protecting, sustainably managing and restoring degraded ecosystems that are a source of our food, water, energy, wealth and livelihood. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Diego Pacheco Balanza, General Director on Living Well and Foreign Policy of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, speaking on behalf of the like-minded group. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellency. Bolivia speaks on behalf of the like-minded developing countries, LMDC. This is indeed a critical decade, and the reason the decade has become critical is largely because of the inadequate action and unfulfilled promises by developed countries. Our countries are suffering the impacts of climate change due largely to the historical emissions of developed countries. For us, as developing countries, our people's lives, their very survival, and their livelihoods are at stake. Our people are suffering the consequences has not been caused. Mitigation action by developed countries has not been forthcoming, even though the Convention and its Paris Agreement make it clear that the developed countries must take the lead on mitigation. Developed countries have failed to achieve their emission reductions, and instead of reducing their emissions, are increasing them by 2030. Developed countries have not only failed in raising ambition, they have also squarely failed in providing the committed support to developing countries, which is their legal obligation. The report not provide a clear picture of whether we have received the 100 billion goal per year. According to the OECD report, developed countries' public climate finance provided bilaterally and through multilateral channels mainly took the form of loans and to a lesser extent grants. This is a very disturbing trend. A significant share of loans has adverse implications for the macroeconomic stability of developing countries. How can we be celebratory about claims that the 100 billion goal has been delivered? The idea of any goal is to be able to reach it, and to reach it we need to be able to track it. Unfortunately, this is one of the biggest lessons of the 100 billion goal. Tracking its achievement is fraught with contests. It is a high time. We appreciate that the several challenges climate finance face stream from the lack of a common definition of climate finance and accounting methodology, which render tracking climate finance flows nearly impossible. We hear all the time that the private sector will resolve all climate challenges in developing countries, and we need to use innovative instruments. The latest Adaptation Gap report states that only around 1/3 of the adaptation finance is in areas financed by the private sector. The 100 billion progress report by the SCF states, while progress has been made in mobilizing climate finance for developing countries, challenges remain, particularly in relation to scaling up climate finance from MDBs and mobilizing private finance. And yet, developed countries constantly attempt to transfer ownership to the private sector. Developed countries must acknowledge that they have failed to meet the annual mobilization goal of 100 billion for the period since 2013 and provide the arrears they owe to developing countries. That's why a successful negotiation of the NCQG in this COP is critical for the implementation of the Convention at this Paris Agreement, taking into account that developed countries have the legal obligation to provide financial resources and means of implementation to developing countries. Finance is not charity. Finance is a legal obligation of developed countries under the Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Trevor Manimahanga, Minister of Environment, Climate Change, Disaster Management and Meteorology of Solomon Islands. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, esteemed delegates, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the government and people of Solomon Islands. At the outset, I congratulate you on your election to the COP presidency and thank the government and people of Azerbaijan for hosting us in this beautiful country. The agency to address climate change demands decisive leadership, and we are confident that you will provide it. The Solomon Islands, like many least developed countries, as well as small island developing states, are on the front lines of the climate crisis. Climate change is a reality, and our stories now are those of loss, displacement, suffering, and erosion of culture and heritage. We welcome the focus of COP29 on climate finance. But we must not lose sight of the need to keep global warming to 1.5 because our survival and the health of our planet to be able to sustain life depends on limiting global temperature rise. Madam President, Solomon Islands is concerned that the latest synthesis report of the nationally determined contributions and outcomes of the first global stocktake point to an overshoot of global temperatures beyond 1.5 degree warming. High-emitting countries must take our plight seriously and increase mitigation ambition and action. It is imperative that major emitters address the root cause of this crisis, which is the emission of greenhouse gases. Solomon Islands is gravely concerned at the lack of outcome from the subsidiary body sessions. We urge all parties to ensure that COP29 delivers a decision of substance under the mitigation work program. The global stocktake presents a vital opportunity for transparent evaluation of the progress made toward our climate goals. There must be a follow-up on implementation of mitigation outcomes from the global stocktake, including the phasing out of fossil fuels, removal of fossil fuel subsidies, tripling of renewables, and doubling of energy efficiency. Madam President, climate finance is a critical enabler of effective climate action. However, we operate in an unjust international financial architecture. We cannot effectively address vulnerabilities and enhance resilience when the international financial architecture and the great reliance on debt instruments contributes to exacerbating our existing financial burdens and strained economies. Funding must be significantly grant-based, predictable, and unburdened by complex and onerous processes. The current system of climate finance is demonstrably failing, considering the promised $100 billion has fallen woefully short, marred by a lack of transparency and accountability. The lessons learned from the failures of the current climate finance system must shape the new collective quantified goal. Madam President, NCQG must deliver pathways and timeframes to keep the 1.5 degree goal alive, guided by the most recent science. It must provide accessible, simplified, predictable, additional, and crucially, grant-based finance to meet the needs of the developing nations. The NCQG must operationalize the Article 9.4 of the Paris Agreement. It must also establish a minimum flow of allocation for seeds and LDCs. Madam President, Solomon Islands acknowledge the swift establishment of the fund for responding to loss and damage. We urge for its swift operationalization to address the pressing needs of vulnerable communities. Madam President, Solomon Islands is deeply concerned by the devastating impacts of climate change on our marine ecosystems. fisheries, and overall livelihoods. We urge the UN FCCC bodies to give this issue the serious attention it deserves. We believe the success of this COP hinges on transparency, accountability, and equitable partnerships. Together, we can overcome the challenge before us and create a more resilient future for all. In closing, I want to express our sincere appreciation for the excellent leadership and efforts of the COP29. We must use this momentum to ensure our collective commitment to a sustainable future for all. The 1.5-degree goal is not negotiable, for it is a matter of survival. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Asterio Api, Minister of Climate Change and National Resilience of Nauru. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to thank the government of Azerbaijan for the excellent COP29 arrangements and the people of Baku for welcoming us to their beautiful city. Madam President, as it has become all too familiar at these meetings, we arrive at COP29 on a wave of dire projections regarding the state of the climate. Greenhouse gas emissions, temperatures, sea levels continue their unabated climb. Record cyclones, rainfall events, and heat waves hammer countries across the world. The only thing that does not seem to be on an upward trajectory is climate finance, which continues to lag far behind developing country needs. That does not mean the Pacific Island countries like Nauru are failing to act. I would like to commend the climate leadership coming from the small island developing states, despite the widening finance gap. Nauru too is pursuing ambitious plans that will build our resilience to climate change impacts and drive down our emissions. Next year, Nauru will submit the next update to our NDCs, which will go beyond the previous iterations on the scale of emission. We expect to raise our existing renewable energy targets of 50% for electricity generation, which we expect to achieve well ahead of schedule. We also intend to pursue aggressive policies to increase energy efficiency across the economy and shift our transport system decisively towards electric vehicles. I would like to emphasize that the responsible development of deep-sea minerals could provide the required metals for the just transition towards much cleaner renewable energy technologies. The centerpiece of our updated NDC will be the Higher Ground Initiative, a multi-generational urban plan development that will transform our single island of 12,000 people. As with many small islands, our housing and essential infrastructures are concentrated on low-lying coastal areas. Due to projected sea level rise, much of this must be relocated. After nearly a 3-year planning and design process, we have completed a new master land use plan, as well as a detailed site plan for Nauru's first smart village. Leveraging climate-smart urbanism, the Higher Ground Initiative will deliver enormous benefits essential to the task of responding to climate impacts. We are ready to begin the constructions of the 10-hectare smart village once financing is secured. In this regard, we have submitted a concept note on the Higher Ground Initiative to the Green Climate Fund, and we humbly request their support. Madam President, climate funding remains critical for climate action, particularly for the developed countries. Green Climate Fund, multilateral development banks. COP29 must catalyze scaled-up climate finance commensurate with the needs of developing countries. Adaptation finance must be grant-based or highly concessionary, not to increase unsustainable debt burden faced by so many countries. The new global goal on finance should reflect this reality and be rooted in developing countries' needs rather than political expediency. Madam President, the climate crisis is relentless and it will not wait. How many more COP meetings must I attend to grasp the depth of the challenges facing my island nation? The truth is, we cannot afford to delay. Action cannot wait for the next COP. It must begin now. We urge the global community to match our courage with unwavering commitment and provide the essential support our nations require. We all know too well one of our most popular phrase, the 1.5 to stay alive. Madam President, we intend to do more than just stay alive. We also intend to prosper and thrive. So I say, 1.5 to stay alive, climate finance for us to thrive. I thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Subhalet An, Minister of Environment of Cambodia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start by thanking the government of Azerbaijan and the UNCCC Secretariat for hosting the 29th UN Climate Change Conference here in this beautiful city of Baku. On behalf of the Royal Government of Cambodia, I hereby reaffirm our strong commitment to both national and international efforts to meet the target set forth in the Paris Agreement on climate change. Although Cambodia is a low greenhouse gas emitter country, it faces daunting risks from climate-induced impacts such as flooding, heat wave, and land degradations, and heightened vulnerability to the adverse impact on climate change. In response to the global climate crisis, Cambodia has set high ambitious pledges in the 2020 updated NDC and is committed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. In support of a holistic approach for the Paris Agreement implementation, the Circular Strategy for Environment 2023-28 has streamlined the climate agenda into Cambodia's Sustainable Development Goals and other national development priorities. At this point, I'm very pleased to share with the conference that we are running an anti-plastic campaign with more than 9.7 million people from all walks of life. More than half of the Cambodian population participated in committing not to use plastic bags and to clean up plastic waste from public areas. In parallel, we also run a campaign to green Cambodia by starting to plant over 1 million trees on the first year and increase annually to expand forest cover toward carbon neutral by 2050. Cambodia has also adopted a new Article 6 operation manual and is actively working to expand carbon market opportunities in 6 sectors. They are energy, industry, solvent, agriculture, forestry, and waste. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there is an urgent need to bold action for all, but must ensure climate finance to implement NDC and long-term strategies for parties under LDC and SIDS categories. We called upon the developed country parties and the highest emitters to enhance their financial commitments while establishing ambitious targets that exceed US $100 billion per year. Furthermore, a simplified modality for direct access to the Green Climate Fund should be operationalized. The world is looking forward to hear concrete results at this Cop29 that will deliver to parties to ensure sustainable economic development and social safeguard for communities suffering from and relentlessly fighting against the climate crisis. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Franz Tattenbach Capra, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, Costa Rica is a small Central American country, but with environmental leadership credentials which sees the work for environmental sustainability, decarbonization, and adaptation to climate change as levers to achieve more competitiveness and productivity as a way of making a more just and equitable society and country. We believe that the call for more climate action made by the president of Cop29 should become part of the DNA of the processes under the Convention and Paris Agreement. We are a nation with a minuscule historical debt of greenhouse gas emissions, but we're paying a high price for the adverse impacts of global warming and climate change. But we have a clear commitment to continue to work towards achieving the targets under the Paris Agreement and to drastically reduce the gap that has been pointed to us by science. We have made huge strides in coming to terms with climate risk and the environmental problem and its territorial impacts, as well as the actions that we must take and which we are now working on to implement. We are an ambitious country, and we hope to scale up our ambition if we have clear signals of the means of implementation to do so. So we need more resources. Climate justice is yet another element of the global commitment. Without the right incentives, our ambition will be very limited, especially because countries such as ours continue to subsidize the growing loss and damage caused by historical emissions, and which are each day being exacerbated by the gap in global efforts to reduce emissions. The costs associated with climate change on our GDP could exceed 3% by the end of this decade in our country. For this reason, it's important that we highlight our achievements in strengthening our energy matrix based on renewable resources as a means of, we're looking at we see this sector and our potential as a way of decarbonizing the international industry. We believe that decarbonization could lead to decarbonization in other countries. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our collective responsibility to make more progress without further delay towards a framework for action that reconciles the aspiration of all to prosper and the natural limitations of our planet, respecting the human rights of all inhabitants, including gender equality, as identified in the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. We cannot fail to take on the huge challenge of sustainable development and eradicating poverty without winning this fight against climate change. Costa Rica, despite its limitations, will continue to be a global leader in sustainability and climate resilience, which strengthens our commitment to act ambitiously to tackle climate change and to collaborate closely with other countries, as well as with international agencies to strengthen our climate financing mechanisms. Thank you very much, Chair. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency, Ms. Leonor Gewessler, Federal Minister for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation, and Technology of Austria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, 1 year ago in Dubai, I addressed you by saying we've just lived through the hottest year ever recorded on planet Earth. 12 months later, we know this is no longer true. 2024 will be even hotter. There is almost no place on this planet that is not affected by the devastating effects of the climate crisis. From the most vulnerable island states whose voices we just heard, to my home country, Austria, in the middle of Europe, lives are lost, homes are destroyed, futures are at stake. We meet here in Baku at a time of utmost urgency. Urgency for everyone, by the way. This is why it's all the more regrettable that this process is not as inclusive as it should be. In Dubai, we agreed on ambitious action, tripling renewables and transitioning away from fossil fuels. This year, we have to follow through. Great commitments are only historic if they are delivered on. So we must encourage all parties to put forward new and ambitious NDCs next year, informed by the results of the first global stocktake and in line with our collective 1.5-degree goal. We need strong action on adaptation in pursuit of the global goal on adaptation that we agreed on last year, and Cop29 must deliver and accelerate on the UAE framework for climate resilience. To achieve all of this, yes, we need the necessary means. A new collective quantified goal of climate finance, therefore, is a central part of the package of issues to be finalized here in Baku. A climate finance goal that makes sure to support developing countries in the transformation and in dealing with extreme conditions, while reflecting the reality that the world has changed since we first started to negotiate decades ago. Our discussions here need to be a starting point for a much larger transformation that surpasses what we traditionally think of when we consider international climate finance. We all know that financing a global transition towards a climate-neutral society will need more than just public money. It has to be a common effort. Ladies and gentlemen, planet Earth will endure, but it's mankind's future that's at risk. Our fight for climate action is a fight for people. It's a fight for us. It's a fight for our dreams. It's a fight for our hopes. And in the end, it's a fight for our lives. This is what COP29 is all about, and this is what we all need to deliver on. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Roger Barrow, Minister of Environment, Water and Sanitation of Burkina Faso. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Burkina Faso is delighted to take part in the 29th Conference of the Parties on Climate Change in Baku. And may I convey to you the warmest greetings of His Excellency, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso, and a fraternal, friendly country of Azerbaijan, and thank you for the warm welcome and hospitality extended to our delegation, and also commend you for the excellent organization of the conference. And my congratulations also go to the President of COP29, and I wish him every success. Ladies and gentlemen, the 29th Conference of the Parties for mobilizing funding especially is taking place at a particularly difficult time with multiple crises and should allow for negotiations which will lead to meaningful commitments to protect the global environment and develop resilient economies. This requires the decisions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and raising the levels of climate finance to meet the commitments in solidarity to develop major resilience programs which are carbon-free, particularly for particularly vulnerable communities. Ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding the security challenges, my country is resilient and is determined to reduce its GHGs by some 29% by 2030 in accordance with its nationally determined contribution, which is expected to cost $4.125 billion. Furthermore, the implementation of our national adaptation plan, which has been revised for 2024-28, which is to cost $5 billion, will allow us to strengthen the resilience of populations and ecosystems. And under the leadership of the presidents of Burkina Faso, President of Burkina Faso and the Prime Minister, Burkina Faso has raised climate change to one of the highest priorities. with a climate transparency plan, with the establishment of a national measuring system, as well as the establishment of a national decree on climate change and the adoption of the 2050 vision for long-term development with low carbon emissions, the low carbon strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, while always advocating the need to take into account the specific circumstances of Africa, Burkina Faso is a supporter of the Bamako Declaration on Climate Security in the Sahel and the Ministerial Declaration of Kampala on Migration, Environment and Climate Change. The Climate, Peace, Security Nexus and the Migration, Environment and Climate Change Nexus must be financed for the sake of climate justice and the global interest in order to tackle problems of terrorism and strengthen the resilience of displaced populations. That is why the strategic objective of the National Plan for Sustainable Development in Burkina Faso seeks to reverse the trends of environmental degradation and depletion of water resources to foster climate resilience and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Burkina Faso calls on the international community to work to ensure there is a proper audit of climate change with meaningful, measurable commitments of the conference through finance, technology transfer, and capacity building of key stakeholders. My country stands with the African position and the position of the developing countries in G77 and China on climate change. And while congratulating the presidency of Cop29 for the Baku Declaration for Climate Action for Peace, which is very much in keeping with the Bamako Declaration and the aims of the Confederation of Sahel States. This is part of the key initiatives in Baku for finance, investment, trade, and reduction of methane emissions from organic substances. My country calls for grants and direct access to finance in order to have fairness, efficiency and justice in combating climate change. Flooding and other natural disasters in 2024 and their consequences call for us to speed up in operationalizing these funds. President, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude by expressing the wish that with ambition and goodwill, the Baku conference will open up better prospects and lay the basis for consolidating our achievements in the area of resilience and sustainable development. And with you, we are not slaves to climate change consequences, and we must work to free ourselves by finding lasting solutions. And to paraphrase Captain Thomas Sankara, our previous president, a slave that cannot rebel does not deserve to be freed. Burkina Faso, like other countries, does not wish to be the slave of the harmful effects of climate change, and it must free itself for a prosperous, peaceful, and sustainable future in which we will vanquish the forces of death. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Jami Diallo, Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development of Guinea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam Chair of the Cop29, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ministers and heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, through my voice, the Republic of Guinea expresses its deep gratitude to the government of the Republic of Azerbaijan for its warm welcome and the sterling organization of its 29th Conference of the Parties. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding its very marginal contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions, Guinea in 2024 did not escape the harmful effects of climate change. Flooding and drought, which impacted our country this year, remind us of the urgency of bold, coordinated and inclusive action to contain the rise in temperature and to bolster our resilience. Given this climate emergency, Guinea is seeking to attain several strategic goals by 2030, including achieving 80% of electric production from water and solar sources, reducing by 50% the average consumption of firewood per capita, thwarting deforestation and degradation of land, and achieve 30% of land and marine protected area coverage for our national territory, and creating a local voluntary carbon credit market related to the mining sector, thus fostering the mobilization of private sector funding to combat climate change, preserving our water resources, and promoting a blue economy. And very recently, Guinea took 2 more major initiatives, substantially facilitating the attainment of our climate goals and contributing to strengthening the global battle for a more viable climate. Firstly, thanks to the leadership of His Excellency General Mamadi Doumbouya, the President of the Republic of Guinea, our country is poised to play a major role in decarbonization of the global iron industry through the conduct of a mega mining infrastructure project in Simandou after several years waiting. Indeed, because of its exceptional content, Simandou's iron ore will need less energy for processing and will thus substantially contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the mining sector. And then secondly, my country has decided to take on the leadership of an international coalition for the restoration of the Fouta Djallon mountain range, which is a true water tower for West Africa. Indeed, this mountain range concentrates the water sources of the main rivers in the sub-region. It is urgent to provide a strong response to the serious threats which loom over this ecosystem in order to increase resilience and preserve biodiversity, and we've started the process of inscribing this site on the UNESCO World Heritage List. These 2 initiatives bear witness to the unstinting commitment of Guinea to contribute to global efforts to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. However, these initiatives are not enough without substantial support from the international community, which is why here again we call for the stepping up of climate finance and greater accessibility to resources for mitigation projects. As a nation committed to sustainable development, Guinea reaffirms its resolve to contribute actively to global efforts to limit climate change to a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. We restate our appeal for action and international solidarity to build a resilient and sustainable world in which each nation, each community, and each ecosystem may thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Nik Nazmi bin Nik Ahmad, Minister of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability of Malaysia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Honorable distinguished delegates, esteemed colleagues, I would like to extend Malaysia's heartfelt gratitude to the government of Azerbaijan for your warm hospitality in hosting Cop29. Your efforts in bringing us together for this critical dialogue on climate action are deeply appreciated. A lot can change and happen in a year. The last time we convened, monumental decisions were made, mainly from the global stocktake exercise concluded in COP28. Back home, we followed up on these efforts. We launched our National Climate Change Policy 2.0 this year to integrate recent global developments and other national policies. This document outlines our pathways to achieving our nationally determined contribution target of a 45% reduction in economy-wide GHG emission intensity by 2030 relative to 2005 levels, and bringing forward our commitment to reaching net zero by 2050. We are also committed to delivering our first biennial transparency report by 31st December 2024 to fulfill our obligations under the enhanced transparency framework. To ensure we can effectively deliver this initiative, we are enacting a climate change bill which will enhance our climate change governance and facilitate the fulfillment of other obligations under the Paris Agreement. We are also finalizing our national arrangement to operationalize Article 6 of the Paris Agreement for the private sector. To reduce emissions more effectively, Malaysia is committed to implement a carbon tax in 2026, as announced by our Prime Minister in the 2025 budget. We have also transitioned from blanket to targeted subsidies with regards to electricity and fuel, so that the rich are no longer subsidized with regards to their carbon emissions. Malaysia likewise acknowledges our role as a custodian to the natural resources bestowed on our country. As one of the world's most mega-diverse countries, we have 20% of all animal species, forests of over 100 million years old, and part of the Coral Triangle. We are committed to sustainably managing our biodiversity, and this is an asset in our fight against climate change. We are also proud recipients of the Global Climate Fund to assist in our National Adaptation Plan. As you can see, our recent efforts have shown that we are fulfilling our responsibilities, although we contribute less than 1% of global emissions. Thus, we remain steadfast in upholding the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities as enshrined in the UNFCCC, especially at this critical juncture. The world is now at a crossroads in the context of financing. Although mandates and resources are available, there continues to be divergences in the common understanding of pooling and mobilizing climate finance. It is galling to see how developed countries spend trillions of dollars to fuel war and conflict, while the Global South is denied more funding for climate action. Thus, we call on developed nations to fulfill their responsibility to provide climate finance and ensure that this funding is accessible and impactful. We also call on those who are more than capable of leading to set more ambitious goals that can significantly elevate our efforts against climate change. If more funding from developed nations are forthcoming, Malaysia will be able to do much more. Currently, we are in the midst of formulating our third generation NDC, which we commit to submit next year. We expect this to be more ambitious, and appropriate means of implementations are crucial to ensure that this goal can be realized. Thus, we believe that these resources, along with participation from the third sector, can propel actions to realize the visions that we have set when Paris Agreement entered force in 2016. In this regard, we must come to the necessary understandings to avoid a path of inaction. However, we recognize that countries cannot fight climate change in isolation. Embracing multilateralism is paramount in this cause. As we gather here, it is imperative that we recognize that progress in our negotiations must advance more rapidly as time is of the essence. As we look ahead to the conclusion of Cop29, we expect it to set a clear and ambitious pathway that will influence negotiations in Cop30 and beyond. Our decisions will shape the climate landscape for years to come, and we must seize this opportunity to strengthen our collective resolve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Celine Carrion-Dajoni, Minister of Public Works, Environment and Urban Development of Monaco. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the government of Azerbaijan and the Secretariat of the Convention for the organization of this 29th COP. It's an honor for me to take the floor on behalf of Monaco, a state whose climate commitment is profoundly embedded in our collective history. Climate change is a real and imminent threat. We are witnessing a proliferation of extreme climate events, global temperature records, the melting of glaciers, rise in sea levels, and a collapse in terrestrial and marine biodiversity. These combined phenomena are jeopardizing food security, public health, as well as international peace and stability. Given this alarming situation, Monaco, under the leadership of His Most Serene Highness Prince Albert II, has been advocating this cause for many years and is striving to set an example nationally. Thus, we've taken on ambitious commitments in the context of the Paris Agreement aiming to reduce by 55% our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. To meet these challenges, the government of the country has embarked upon robust public policy to encourage the use of renewable and innovative energies on the territory, funding the necessary infrastructure, both for energy efficiency of our buildings and for electrification of our transport. Dear colleagues, the first global stocktake conducted last year is unfortunately unequivocal. Our action has so far been insufficient, and we are heading dangerously beyond the tipping point of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The fight against climate change is our collective responsibility, and in the coming weeks, with the benefit of our exchanges and efforts during this COP, it's essential for us all, each and everyone, to submit nationally determined contributions which are in keeping with the long-term goals. Furthermore, the conclusion of a bold agreement on climate finance is paramount for the meaningful, effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, the scale of this task should not discourage us, but prompt us to remain united and act strongly and resolutely to protect all populations wherever they may be by limiting their vulnerability to ever more extreme climate phenomena. This COP29 should remind us that failure is not an option, and we must raise our collective ambitions, accelerate implementation of our public policies, and ensure that the whole of society supports this global strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Panumwenyo Pohamba Shifeta, Minister of Environment, Forestry and Tourism of Namibia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Cop29 President, Your Excellencies. The Republic of Namibia would like to extend its warm appreciation to the government and people of Azerbaijan for the warm hospitality we have received since our arrival in this beautiful city, Baku. Equally, Namibia would like to thank the government of Azerbaijan and the UNFCCC Secretariat for excellent arrangements made to host this very spectacular event. Mr. President, COP29 is taking place when the world is devastated by climate-induced disasters of all kinds. In Namibia, we feel the severity of these negative events already by far. The government of the Republic of Namibia declared a national state of emergency on drought this year, 2024, due to the poor rainfall never experienced in more than 60 years back. If Namibia is in such a state of emergency, what about other parts of the world, the island states, whose future's existence are not certain if we continue with this business as usual? What about those who find themselves in a conflict, the marginalized, the poor, living on handouts? Mr. President, we came here to Baku with a renewed hope that COP29 will deliver on climate finance. We respectfully believe that those whose historically emissions have caused global warming will take responsibility for their actions and compensate the developing world on a polluter pay basis. However, what we are witnessing from the outcome of the past week of negotiations is contrary to our expectation. Mr. President, there is no need to beg for those who cause damage to pay, but we are simply asking the developed world to honor its commitments under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. These are the only international instruments that keep us together for a common purpose of realizing a greener future. We cannot repeat ourselves for a call of a flow of $100 billion per annum as a new collective quantified goal. Time and again, when scientists report are clear on what needs to be done and the costs associated thereon. We call upon developed countries to be honest to themselves and to be also to this very multilateral process. It is common knowledge that climate finance is fundamental for the pathways towards a greener future, yet we are delaying to deliver on it. Therefore, we call for a balanced outcome on climate finance which takes into account the fact that without adequate and predictable financial resources, no meaningful climate action can take place. NDCs will remain unimplemented, and the catastrophic impact of climate change will take effect in severity and frequency as temperature continues to rise. We therefore call on developed countries to respect Article 4 of the UNFCCC and Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement. These provisions must not be turned into loans. We are not here to negotiate for loans and grants, but we are here to ask for a fair and just compensation on the climate damage caused by those who committed environmental crimes. As affected countries, we continue to contribute nothing to the cause of global warming. We will work tirelessly to seek justice on this. I would like to conclude with few words by saying that wisdom without action is meaningless and useless. We need to act and act now in Baku to deliver on ambitious climate finance, a goal that makes a greener world possible in a fair and just manner. Let justice prevail. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mircea Fișe, Minister of Environment, Waters and Forests of Romania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching the end of 2024, a year marked by unprecedented records of extreme events. It is obvious that these are no longer exceptions, but are becoming an integral part of our reality, becoming nature itself. The scientific community continues to warn us that exceeding the 1.5-degree threshold leads to an oppressive reality. It means economic, social, and political insecurity, including climate migration. These situations we must avoid at all costs. That is why we must act as one, leaving aside differences and focusing on what is essential, preserving a world where current and future generations can live. The time for inactivity is long gone, and the implementation of climate actions must take priority over political differences. Ladies and gentlemen, the implementation of climate actions should be perceived by all of us as an opportunity for economic development, social inclusion, ensuring security, well-being and peace. Romania, together with all EU member states, is firmly committed to implementing the necessary measures to address climate change, both in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to its adverse effects. Romania has a long-term strategy to achieve climate neutrality by mid-century at the latest. Specific sectoral measures are included in the National Energy and Climate Plan, designed to ensure the correct trajectory towards neutrality and the implementation of the EU-level NDC for 2030. We have also approved this summer a new national strategy for adaptation to climate change, with a dedicated action plan containing specific measures for 13 economic and social sectors. Fellow ministers, we are well aware that implementing both emission reduction and adaptation measures involves various challenges, including financial ones. At Cop29, the negotiation of the NCQG is complex and reflects current global tensions, but also opportunities for international collaboration to address one of the greatest challenges of our times, mobilizing sufficient resources to fulfill the goals of the Paris Agreement. The involvement of all entities is crucial in delivering on our climate ambitions. To this end, in Romania we are currently prioritizing the development of partnerships with the private sector on energy, transport and industry decarbonization. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge everyone to work on awareness, education and inclusive participation for a just transition, for effectively managing climate change and for maintaining alive the goal of the Paris Agreement. Transparency remains a fundamental pillar at all stages of this process. Failure is not an option for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Grace Fu, Minister for Sustainability and the Environment of Singapore. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, the first global stock trade highlighted the urgency of the climate crisis and that bold actions are needed to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees C. Amidst increasing geopolitical tensions, UNFCCC's role in uniting the world in reaching our collective climate goal is even more vital. Singapore reaffirms our commitment to working with all parties and partners to advance global climate action. Despite being an alternative energy disadvantaged city-state, we have expanded solar deployment by 5-fold since 2019 and are improving energy efficiency across all sectors. But climate change transcends borders, and cross-border collaborations are crucial. Singapore is partnering the global community to find innovative solutions. We are working with our neighbours to realize an ASEAN power grid, a critical enabler of our region's energy transition. Globally, we are partnering other ports to pioneer the use of low-carbon fuels in decarbonizing the shipping sector. We contribute to building knowledge and capabilities in the global community in climate mitigation and adaptation through the Singapore Cooperation Programme and climate research. We are also enabling finance. For many developing countries, financing is what hinders ambition from being translated into action. The new collective quantified goal NCQG is critical in Cop29. We hope that we will deliver an ambitious, effective and fit-for-purpose NCQG outcome, respecting the principles of Paris Agreement. Singapore is fully committed to doing our part in line with the Paris Agreement to mobilize private capital towards supporting Asia's transition. Last year, we launched the FAST-P, or Financing Asia's Transition Partnership. At Cop29, we pledged up to $500 million to crowd in other concessional capital from public, private and philanthropic sources of an equal amount. This will catalyze a much larger amount of private capital to support green and transition projects. Carbon credits are another innovative source of finance. We are working with partners to develop a well-functioning and credible carbon market, including through the co-facilitation of the Paris Agreement Article 6 negotiations and building a pipeline of high-quality, high-integrity credits. Mr. President, Singapore affirms our full support for your leadership and the UNFCCC. We are committed to take action. We have submitted our first biannual transparency report and will submit our 2035 NDCs on time. Together with our friends and partners, let us turn our climate ambitions into reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Fu. Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Bungkam Vorachit, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Laos People's Democratic Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Laos extends our congratulations to the government of Azerbaijan for hosting Cop29. Currently, climate change has caused the highest temperature record and more extreme weather events, leading to significant economic human loss. Laos has experienced with tropical storm caused widespread flooding throughout the country, severely impact infrastructure, house and farmlands. Laos is working to reduce emissions by 60% by 2030 through emission reduction programs, forest management, low carbon agriculture, clean energy and clean energy efficiency. This year, we have advanced our national climate change agenda by implementing our national strategy on climate change and developing our national adaptation plan. The country aims for net zero emission by 2050, aligned with the global efforts to limit climate change and carbon footprint. With the long-term low-emission development strategy, BTR and carbon decree, we are ready to engage in the global carbon market and align climate action with sustainable development goals. Mr. President, at the 2024 ASEAN Chair, Laos collaborated with ASEAN member states to draft the ASEAN Joint Statement on Climate Change for COP29. This statement emphasizes equity and various responsibility, encourages COP28 outcome, and urges developed countries to speed up financial pledges and support for technology and capacity building. It also calls for more climate finance, especially for vulnerable communities, and easy access for international climate funds, focusing on the loss and damage funds. Mr. President, despite progress, significant work remains. Turning pledges into action is challenging, especially for vulnerable countries. Climate change adaptation needs substantial investment and technology. International support is crucial to achieving the goals. In this connection, we anticipate COP29 outcomes to establish fair climate fund distribution, simplify access and fully operationalize the loss and damage funds. This financial support is essential for vulnerable countries to move towards a sustainable and climate resilient future. To this end, Laos reaffirms its unwavering commitment to climate action and stand ready to collaborate with all parties to combat climate change. Together, we can build a prosperous, sustainable, and resilient future for our planet. I thank you.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Firstly, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the government of the Republic of Azerbaijan for hosting COP29 here in Baku, a city with rich history and architecture. At a critical juncture where solidarity from the global community is required to foster just transition to achieve the Paris Agreement goal. Thailand is among the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change. We have suffered record-breaking heat at 43 degrees Celsius, flash floodings due to heavy rainfall, as well as landslides, causing irreparable damage to our economy and livelihoods. This includes biodiversity loss, such as seagrass, which would cause a decline in dugong populations by around 50% in less than 6 years. In the global greenhouse gas emissions context, Thailand emits less than 1% of greenhouse gas. However, we are fully determined to enhance our mitigation action, upholding the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances to achieve our NDC 2030 by reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 222 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent in 5 sectors: energy, transport, waste, industrial process and product use, and agriculture, with the action plan on mitigation in place to ensure a tangible action. Mr. President, the first global stocktake significantly shows that our current efforts are still insufficient to control the global temperature increase. Therefore, Thailand aims to raise our ambition towards the absolute emissions reduction in NDC 3.0, we plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to below 270 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent against the 2019 level economy-wide by 2035. A comprehensive green investment plan will support the implementation of NDC 3.0. Additionally, we will boost the greenhouse gas sink in LULUCF by 120 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent by 2037. For the adaptation aspect, which is crucial, we aim to integrate national adaptation plan into local action in 6 sectors: water resource management, agriculture and food security, tourism, public health, natural resource management, and human settlements and security. Particularly, the development of the early warning system is to be put in place to handle climate-related hazards at the local level, and also the restoration and protection of marine and coastal biodiversity will be accelerated. Mr. President, turning policy into action is vital in achieving the Paris Agreement goal. Thailand has put public-private people partnership at the heart of climate action. We have organized the Thailand Climate Action Conference 2024 to raise awareness, deepen understanding, and foster climate empowerment in Thai society. At the same time, Thailand is pushing forward the Climate Change Act to formulate a balanced package in developing carbon pricing instruments and climate fund to steer our socio-economic development towards climate resilience. Mr. President, I strongly hope that at this COP, the NCQG will be finalized and that the rules and guidelines for the operationalization of the loss and damage fund will be clearly defined in order to support particularly vulnerable developing countries to enhance and accelerate their climate action and their capacity to fight against the threat of climate change. I believe that our gathering at this crucial moment will set forth the solid transitional pathway to achieve the Paris Agreement goal. Last but not least, I urge the global community to come together as one and show our determination to preserve the very existence of our planet for all of us and for future generations to enjoy a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Robert Bouvier Torterolo, Minister of Environment of Uruguay. Su Excelencia, tiene la palabra.
Mr. President, let me begin by thanking the presidency of Cop29 for hosting us in this beautiful city and giving us the right conditions we need to take our work forward in this multilateral effort. Uruguay reaffirms its commitment to the Convention and its Paris Agreement. The climate crisis we're facing requires global coordinated action based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. This challenge is one that is incumbent on all of us, and we must act jointly to protect our populations and the ecosystems sustaining our livelihoods. We came to this COP with the hope of achieving an ambitious decision on the new collective quantified goal for financing. This is fundamental for developing countries and key to strengthening the credibility of the multilateral system. It is only through adequate financing that we will be able to implement the necessary actions to mitigate and adapt ourselves to climate change. We're also awaiting robust decisions on adaptation. Uruguay already has 4 national adaptation plans focused on agriculture and livestock production, coasts, cities, and infrastructure and energy. Despite our achievements, we need to work further on implementation, which will to a great extent depend on the availability of accessible resources that are sustainable to finance these actions. Our country is small in size, and most of our people live on the coast, and we have an agricultural and industry and service-based economy, which makes us highly vulnerable to climate change. For this reason, our climate policies are based on respect for human rights, preservation of ecosystems, gender equity, and a just transition for everyone. Although Uruguay emits only 0.05% of global greenhouse gases, we have implemented significant measures for mitigation. More than 95% of our electricity matrix comes from renewable sources, and we are trying to achieve a second energy transition based on green hydrogen. We also launched the National Policy for Sustainable Urban Mobility, and we have substantially reduced our emissions in livestock production, showing that sustainability and productivity are compatible. In December this year, we will be presenting our first BTR, showing our challenges and the progress. In February 2025, we will be presenting our third NDC with new concrete commitments to climate action that will take us a step forward in our achieving our goals. Our commitment to climate action is backed by concrete actions such as the mission of issuance in 2022 of a sovereign bond linked to our climate indicators and a World Bank loan that rewards us with lower interest rates if we fulfill our national climate objectives. In a complex context, we believe firmly in multilateralism as the best way forward. However, the urgency of fulfilling and stepping up our international commitments to financing, guaranteeing accessible resources and sustainable resources for developing countries which are most vulnerable to climate change is important. We are calling on international financial institutions to broaden the base of tools to promote climate action with genuine ambition. We are glad that the next COP will be held in Brazil, and we trust that in this week we will achieve substantial results that will benefit everyone. Cooperation globally is not only a shared commitment, but it is our hope to tackle one of the greatest challenges of our time. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Excelencia.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Daouda Ngom, Minister of Environment and Ecological Transition of Senegal. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, President of the Cop29, ladies and gentlemen ministers, may I begin on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Bassirou Diomaye Diakhar Faye, President of Senegal, by conveying my warmest congratulations and thanks to His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev, the President of the Republic, and the people and government of Azerbaijan for the hospitality and perfect organization of this 29th COP. I commend Mr. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, for his constant commitment to attaining the vital objectives of the UN Framework Convention and the Paris Agreement. We have met here with the firm resolve to strengthen cooperation and raise climate ambition in order to slow down or even neutralize the warming trend of the planet. The climate crisis is not a zero-sum game. Saving the planet means saving humanity, and there's no alternative. We must act urgently. The world is affected in every way by the extreme climate events with deadly catastrophic consequences. Sudden flash flooding, devastating surges in the river basins of the Senegal, Gambia, and Niger rivers in West Africa have destroyed and displaced thousands of people, and sea level rises and coastal erosion seriously jeopardize our country's infrastructure and system. In recent months, Senegal, through its budget, has mobilized more than 30 billion CFA francs to minimize losses related to flooding and to support the victims, while also coping with loss of habitat and infrastructure along its 718-kilometer coastline. Having to plan inclusive and sustainable socio-economic development with investment which may be annihilated by an extreme climate event is a real ordeal, a Sisyphean challenge for developing countries such as our own, and our countries are compelled to put themselves in debt to deal with the loss and damage from these regular events. This situation is not fair and must be corrected by a new decision on finance. It is a time for action. Finance and accessibility must be straightforward and rapid to implement nationally determined contributions, adaptation plans, and other initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, the path we have come since Rio 92 to Baku is long, strewn with challenges, but these 33 years of endurance have convinced us that the climate crisis will have to be managed in a crisis situation, making our mission more difficult but not impossible. The adoption of the special fund on loss and damage has generated a glimmer of hope. We're counting on strengthening this fund this session through climate finance increases. Senegal calls on all parties to mobilize strong decisions on adequate and accessible climate finance based on a proper grant system for adaptation, loss and damage, and also while providing proper remuneration for carbon transactions from the developing countries through the establishment of a floor price. Ladies and gentlemen, let us act quickly and together so that no country is left by the wayside. The radiant future we wish to have and the survival of our species depend upon it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Balarabe Abbas Lawal, Minister of Environment of Nigeria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I'm pleased to congratulate you on your election as the President of this 29th Conference of Parties. The Nigerian delegation would like to assure you of our support and commitment towards achieving good outcome for this conference. We further extend our gratitude to the President of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, and the good people of the Republic of Azerbaijan for hosting the first COP in the Caucasus region. Nigeria is one of the countries of the world most vulnerable to adverse impact of climate change. There are increasing evidences that Nigeria is experiencing widespread challenges attributed to climate change and its impact. This directly constitutes severe limitation to the achievement and progress of our sustainable development and associate aspirations. To address this concern, Nigeria is intensifying the implementation of policies and plans to cut greenhouse emissions, increase resilience, and include climate change solutions into our national planning process. Nigeria is making investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency, afforestation, transportation, and other climate-friendly initiatives. Almost 10 years after the Paris Agreement, the world stands at a defining juncture on the transition from fossil fuels. Nigeria has joined the world in deployment and adoption of several interrelated technologies, especially that of renewable energy sources, such as compressed natural gas, CNG, mobility system, and electrification of technologies such as electric vehicles. The country is committed to implementing its energy transition plan and long-term emission development strategy with the goal of increasing energy efficiency. We are open to collaborating and partnering to expand our proportion of renewable energy. Further, Nigeria is working towards achieving net zero emissions by 2060 and enhancing its national determined contribution NDC. Accordingly, Nigeria has developed its NDC's implementation framework and look forward to partnering on its delivery. In our stride toward reducing sustainable climate changes, we are incorporating adaptation measures into policies, programs, and actions. An adaptation compact with project pipelines exist to help us build the much-needed resilience. We are open to partnering in this regard. Also, Nigerian Adaptation Plan, NAP, is being finalized to make Nigeria more resilient to its development priorities and system. To enable countries withstand climate change impact, Nigeria hereby advocates for the provision of the means of implementation to achieve global goal on adaptation. In our effort to reduce our carbon footprint and achieve our national objective, we have developed a framework and strategy for participation in the Article 6 carbon market. In 2023, an intergovernmental committee on carbon market activation was formed to oversee the carbon efficiency in Nigeria. Nigeria aligns with the rest of Africa in demanding greater, easier access to international finance, including grant and concessional loans to support mitigation and adaptation efforts. We stress the need to significantly scale up adaptation finance to enable developing countries to accelerate adaptation and build resilience. We also urge for accelerated effort to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund to mitigate the damaging impact of climate change globally. Nigeria further aligned with the Harare Declaration by African Ministers of Health to take action on the impact of climate change. Mr. President, addressing climate change is a common and shared responsibility. This COP presents all of us another useful opportunity to move from rhetorics to concrete action. The world must act now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Valentine Uwamaliya, Minister of Environment of Rwanda. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Cop29 President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express our gratitude and appreciation to the government of Azerbaijan for presiding over and hosting COP29. I also thank the people of Azerbaijan for your warm hospitality accorded to us and to all our delegations in this beautiful city of Baku. Climate change impacts are a threat to our agriculture, water resources, biodiversity, and human health. In Rwanda, according to the recent Country Climate and Development Report, climate change costs 5 to 7% of our GDP annually. This is a significant impact on our economy. Rwanda needs $11 billion USD to build resilience and reduce our GHG emission at the scale of 38% by 2030. To address the above challenge, Rwanda has placed climate resilience at the heart of our development agenda. Rwanda has consistently set ambitious climate targets, and while we are revising our nationally determined contributions, we will once again raise our ambition from the baseline of 38% reduction by 2030 as pledged before. By 2050, Rwanda aims to be a climate-neutral nation. Cop29 President. Cop29 should deliver ambitious, balanced, fair and just outcomes that set the world on a course to effectively address the climate change on several fronts, including adaptation, loss and damage, finance and mitigation. Such an outcome should be guided by the best available science, principles and provisions of the Convention on the Paris Agreement. Countries must set a new collective goal for climate finance that meets the needs of developing countries now and into the future who are particularly vulnerable to climate change. The quality of finance is particularly critical for African countries. There is need to address the unsustainable debt burden, high cost of capital, and increasing use of non-concessional finance instruments that hinder the ability of African countries to achieve their climate and development goals. The new collective quantified goal framework should therefore address the types of finance instruments and their relative contribution to the quantum with a clear share of public grant finance. Indeed, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage needs to be fully operationalized and resourced to support the developing countries to respond effectively to these losses and damages, and also prioritizing grant-based and concessional financing is vital. Globally, we need high-emitting nations to do more, to quickly reduce emissions and swiftly move to clean energy. Climate action must be collective. That means working together to share knowledge, experience, and technologies required to build a greener future. In conclusion, Rwanda reiterates its commitment and stands ready to work collaboratively with the international community to implement effective climate solutions that safeguard the well-being of present and future generations. Let us seize this opportunity at COP29 to reinforce our commitment to a sustainable, resilient, and low-carbon future. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. On behalf of the conference, I would like to thank you all for your statement. Distinguished delegates, we will now continue with the delivery of national statement today at 3 p.m., 15 hours, in this plenary. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP and the CMA adjourned.